Hello, my name is Will Byrne, and I am going to talk today about developing a business model, nonprofits, for-profits, and e-commerce. With for-profits, the main goal for them is to generate profit and value for shareholders and stakeholders. They produce goods and services to the general public, and they can be both either private or public companies. Some examples of for-profit companies on the public side, companies you've probably heard of like Apple, Nike, General Electric. On the nonprofit side, there are those like Fidelity Investments, State Farm Insurance, and your local mom and pop stores that you might find down the street, whether that's convenience stores or pharmacy stores. Next, nonprofits are different from for-profits in that they are more focused on a social mission and serving others. They use their money, they still are involved with money and raising revenue, but they use that money to maximize their benefits, and they are not individually owned, unlike for-profit companies. This graphic right here shows some of the different sectors that make up nonprofits. As you can see, the vast majority are for human services at about 35.5%. Next, you have a lot of nonprofits involved in education, also healthcare industry, arts, culture, and then general public and societal benefit. Some examples of nonprofits, there are thousands and thousands across the US and the globe, but here are a few examples: TED Talk, the American Red Cross, Oxfam, Goodwill, Mozilla, and then things like the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma. In terms of funding for for-profits, there are three main ways that they get their money. One through profit, debt, or equity, and they can do just one of these, or they can do any combination of one of these three different models. Profit funding is generally considered to be the most sustainable method for businesses to run in terms of long term. And all that means is generating more money than you have in expenses. So that's when your revenue is higher than your cost of goods sold. When that happens and you generate a profit, you're able to do one of many different things with that profit. You can reinvest it in the company, you can hire more employees, you can fund research and development, or you can have the option of distributing that to shareholders or giving out bonuses to employees. Next, debt funding. This is also very common for for-profit companies. That's simply borrowing money from others, whether that be privately through bank loans. This is pretty common with small businesses to take out a small business loan. That can be for $10,000, or you can have companies that take out very large loans in the millions of dollars range. Also, public companies at times issue debt, and that's oftentimes in corporate bonds, where they provide a bond in which a collection of people purchase with the expectation that they will get their money back along with interest. And so in both these cases, whether it's public or private through bank loans or corporate bonds, it all is involved with an initial borrowing amount, whether that's $10,000, and then additional interest payments along with that. So if you borrow $10,000, you will likely have to pay an agreed upon percentage of that back, whether that's 5%, 10%, or more, through interest payments. Lastly, in terms of for-profit funding, there's equity funding. This is also pretty common with larger companies in which they sell a percentage of the company to investors. With public companies, This can be done through public stock exchanges, such as the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and other exchanges, both in the US and overseas. Private equity funding can be done through venture capitalists or other small investors that are willing to privately fund individual companies. With the nonprofit funding models, there's really a list of 10 main ones here that I can go through. There's the Heartfelt Connector, Beneficiary Builder, Member Motivator, Big Better, Public Provider, Policy Innovator, Beneficiary Broker, Resource Recycler, Market Maker, and the Local Nationalizer. And I'll discuss a few of those in more detail right now. The Resource Recycler is pretty common for nonprofits. That's simply collecting donations from corporations or individuals and then repackaging those or redistributing those to those in need. An example of that would be the Feeding America nonprofit, also the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma, in which they take goods, oftentimes food, from grocery stores that no longer need it, and then they package that and provide it to those in need, whether that's through soup kitchens or, you know, giving it back through large donations or school program meals, any different way that they want to take those goods and distribute it to those who need food. Another one is called the Market Maker, and that's where services that are oftentimes seen as unethical or unlawful for for-profits to perform are done by nonprofits. And an example of that is organ donation, where here in the US it's illegal for an individual or a corporation to sell organs on a public or private market. So things like the American Kidney Fund is able to take organ donations and use their market to give it to those in need. And the last one I'll talk about is the local nationalizer. This is also pretty common, where you have large national networks that have individual local chapters throughout different cities or counties or states. Two examples of this would be Big Brothers Big Sisters of America and Teach for America. So with that, a lot of times the national organization can provide an identity and brand awareness like Big Brothers Big Sisters. They will receive funding from government or individual investors, individual people willing to donate. And then within that, they will distribute that money to different chapters. Like there will be a chapter here in Oklahoma City or any state, typically in the US, and where they work with kids to, help them, whether they don't have a parent or a good role model, and help them through schooling or after school activities. And this graphic here shows a breakdown of some of the nonprofit revenue. You can see a lot of it just comes from fees from private sources for the goods and services. A large percentage comes from government, also private donations. You can see almost 13%. Next, e-commerce or electronic commerce is simply the purchase, sale, and exchange of goods and services through electronic means, and oftentimes the internet. So it started in the 70s before the World Wide Web through electronic data interchange, or EDI. And within e-commerce, there are 4 different categories. There's business to business, business to consumer, consumer to business, and consumer to consumer. With business to business, that is 2 different companies exchanging goods and services within themselves. So an example of that would be the Ford Motor Company purchasing tires from Goodyear. Next, with business to consumer, this is probably what most of us are familiar with. That's when businesses sell over the internet to consumers. So the most popular example of that would be Amazon.com, and where you can go to their website and buy just about anything you want. Another company is Alibaba.com, which is very large in Asia, and they also do some business here in the US. Consumer to business, that's when consumers post their goods and services online, and then businesses can bid on them. An example of that would be a photographer posting some of their stock images and then having a company purchase the rights to use that images. And then lastly, consumer to consumer, that's when two different individuals buy from each other. Two of the more popular ones with that are Craigslist, where a consumer can put up pretty much anything they want online, and another consumer can contact that person and purchase that if they'd like. And then the auction site, eBay, where two consumers interact with each other and purchase goods and services. Lastly, the value chain. This is for different corporations. There are 5 different primary activities and then several different support activities that all lead to their margin. And this first one here is the inbound logistics. And that's really just about activities for receiving, storing, and distributing goods internally. And then operations is taking those goods and creating them into outputs where they're sold to customers. That outbound logistics piece is delivering your product or your service to the customer. And marketing and sales is trying to persuade the client to purchase from you rather than another company. And lastly, the service piece is after a consumer has purchased something, it's working with them to maintain your value and make sure that your service is still intact after they've made a purchase. And so lastly, I thought I'd go through just a quick activity to kind of explain some of the for-profit funding models, in this case, publicly traded companies. If you want, you can go to a company or a website like Yahoo Finance or Google Finance and look up different companies and see some of the background with how they get their money. So if we want to check out just an example company, GM, you can look at their ticker symbol, which is GM for General Motors. You can see that they are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and the price last traded on Friday at the end of the business day was $34.64. And so you can see they have a market cap of roughly $52 billion. And so they generated money through an IPO in which a lot of people would purchase their stock in exchange for a small percentage of that stock in ownership of the company and the expectations of dividends or earnings in the future. And so if you wanted to go and buy GM, you could go and purchase anywhere from 1 share for $34.64 or up to hundreds of thousands of shares with that company. Another company we could look at would be Facebook. Their ticker symbol is FB, and just to compare them to General Motors, they're on the NASDAQ exchange, and their market cap, as you can see, is a lot larger at around $435 billion. So they last traded at $150.25. You can purchase shares of them as well, although each share would be worth much less since the company is worth more. So that's all I had to say, and I appreciate you listening and learning more about funding models and for-profit and nonprofit companies. Thank you.